Hi, everybody. This is Bob Granito from IVP Research Labs. This is another installment of Both Sides of the Mirror. Today, I'm happy to announce that we have hired a new employee to IVP, and it's someone who I've worked with many years doing different types of research, but primarily behavioral and emotional measurements. I'd like to introduce Bill Thau, formerly from HCD Research, now with IVP Research Labs. I know, a lot of acronyms to swallow, but hopefully we didn't overwhelm you with that. So, Bill, I'd like to welcome you to IVP officially. Great to have you on board.
Thanks, Bob. Great to be aboard. Can you believe it was like around 11 years ago where we first started, building labs and working with the biometric data and getting through all the media work we were doing at the time?
Yeah, I know it's been a while, and I'd like to say I had hair when we first met, but unfortunately I haven't had hair for quite some time, so I can't say that. But anyway.
Yeah, me neither. It's just kind of the thing that happens. You know what? It makes EEG really easy. Whenever we need to test it, I just get a clean shave and it works out great. I don't want to spoil the other technicians by making it too easy, but that's one of the ways we'll validate it is with our heads.
You're right. You can put as many sensors on my head as you want, and it's not going to be an issue.
Sure.
All right. So, Bill, we're very excited here at IVP to have you on board. We think you bring another level of knowledge and expertise to the table that I think a lot of clients are going to appreciate. So, that being said, why don't you just give us a sense of your specialty for those at home and some, I guess, specific projects that you might have worked on over the years, whether it was together with us or whether it was when you were with HCD and so on. But anyway, just give us all just a general sense of what your expertise is.
Yeah. So when I started with HCD back when they were in business, it was about maybe 20 years ago or so that I started there. It's again, time sure flies, right? My formal training is in computer science. That's what I have my degrees in and all that. And this was before the days of Qualtrics and Confirmit, really. So we were doing a lot of our own, custom data collection and stuff like that, coming up with custom solutions for surveys and online webinars and things like that. And then over the years, as things progressed, all of a sudden eye tracking come on the scene for qualitative stuff. Back when the Toby was really first starting getting into research, and it was the T60, and it was a really big deal, and it was $30,000. And I'm sure you guys went through the same thing, way back when. So we moved on to eye tracking. And one of the things about HCD as an organization, they were always big into what's the next best thing, which way is the industry going. And that, even to this day, has really stayed with me. But that's what propelled that organization into working with, physiology, biometrics, EEG, neuroscience, things like that, as kind of, hey, this is another way that the research industry is going. Why don't we explore it and see which ways we can apply this in the industries that we work in, which at the time were mostly, marketing, pharmaceuticals, print ads, videos. We did some work with Super Bowl ads, things like that. And we were working with Dr. Paul Bowles, who I think he's at University of Washington now. At the time, he was with the University of Missouri with their media lab. And Dr. Michelle Nagella came on board full-time at HCD, and she and I worked very closely to kind of build out the kind of advanced research initiatives there, alongside some other people as well. And as my time there moved on, we kind of moved away from, your traditional, qualitative types of research. And while we still did print ads and videos, we also got more into product testing and behavioral economics and behavioral research and things like that. So, some of the more interesting studies I worked on, one was studying the bonding between a mother and a baby during bath time. And we used, facial EMG and some biometrics alongside professional facial coding on the infant, or I think it was infant or toddler. I mix that up sometimes. Young child, to try to look at all of these subconscious responses and communications they were having with each other to try to optimize.
Let me stop you just for a second, Bill, because I just want to mention, we've talking about a lot of different technologies, and I can attest to the fact that obviously, technology has gotten much better since we first started working together, 14, 15 years ago. And as much as things change, they still stay the same, right? So a lot of times the methodology doesn't really change. The technology has just gotten better over the years, right? So that being said, I know there's been obviously all we hear every day about technology is AI, AI, AI. So I know, what AI means to IVP, and I'm sure it means the same to you because we've had this conversation. So for those at home, why don't you just give us a sense of what AI means to IVP in terms of data analysis and things like that. So again, if I just said to you, hey, Bill, what does AI mean
Yeah,
to
I
you?
mean, realistically, it is the hot word right now. And again, coming from a computer science background, had deep studies in AI back in the day. I do have a little bit of a different perspective than most, but I won't get too far down that rabbit hole. But we see things like using synthetic data and all kinds of like real advanced ways of trying to use it. And in some cases, organizations are trying to use it in place of traditional research or standard research, which I think is a bit of a slippery slope. Kind of have to watch out for that. But the kind of easy entryway into the door, at least for us, is when it comes to basic things like transcriptions all the way up through data processing. Because one of the things that really held me back and other researchers that I close with was good devices you use. Yeah, so when I started with HCD back when they were in business, it was about maybe 20 years ago or so that I started there. It's again, time sure flies, right? My formal training is in computer science. That's what I have my degrees in and all that. And this was before the days of Qualtrics and Confirm It, really. So we were doing a lot of our own, custom data collection and stuff like that, coming up with custom solutions for surveys and online webinars and things like that. And then over the years, as things progressed, all of a sudden, eye tracking came on the scene for qualitative stuff. Back when the Toby was really first starting getting into research, and it was the T60, and it was a really big deal, and it was $30,000. And I'm sure you guys went through the same thing, way back when. So we moved on to eye tracking. And one of the things about HCD as an organization, they were always big into what's the next best thing, which way is the industry going, and that even to this day has really stayed with me. But that's what propelled that organization into working with physiology, biometrics, EEG, neuroscience, things like that. As kind of, hey, this is another way that the research industry is going. Why don't we explore it and see which ways we can apply this in the industries that we work in, which at the time were mostly marketing, pharmaceuticals, print ads, videos. We did some work with Super Bowl ads, things like that. And we were working with Dr. Paul Bowles, who I think he's at University of Washington now. At the time, he was with the University of Missouri with their media lab. And Dr. Michelle Nagella came on board full-time at HCD, and she and I worked very closely to kind of build out the kind of advanced research initiatives there, alongside some other people as well. And as my time there moved on, we kind of moved away from, your traditional, qualitative types of research. And while we still did print ads and videos, we also got more into product testing and behavioral economics and behavioral research and things like that. So, some of the more interesting studies I worked on, one was studying the bonding between a mother and a baby during bath time. And we used, facial EMG and some biometrics alongside professional facial coding on the infant, or I think it was infant or toddler. I mix that up sometimes. Young child, to try to look at all of these subconscious responses and communications they were having with each other to try to optimize.
Yeah, no, thank you, Bill. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, AI to me, means, hey, we're going to be much more efficient on the analysis side. But I also try to remind our clients all the time that, AI doesn't necessarily provide you with the emotional aspect of the data, right? It's like more factual. It's like, hey, this is what happened. It's more of the what, not much of the why, right? So I know, and we've worked together on projects already since you've started here at IVP, that, we try to incorporate the why side of the equation as much as possible, right? And obviously we partner with other providers as well, maybe a researcher and, that side of things. But I think, we have the opportunity where we do have the ability to capture both sides of the mirror, right? So not only the technology side and the data side, but the human side of it, right? Meaning, how are people feeling emotionally, right? So it's not just eye tracking that tells us, hey, where's someone look? We try to fill in the gaps and figure out why did they look somewhere or why did they not look somewhere. So
Right.
I think that's really important. And as you know, we just worked on a couple of projects, one with a big financial company doing eye tracking with mobile devices, right? Because that's their primary access way of interacting with, that company's product. And, we added some biometrics and stuff like that. But all in all, at the end of the day, we were able to provide our client in this case with not only the data, but the why side of things as well, right? And again, it all goes back to, how a project is designed and what types of measures you're collecting and how you're interpreting those and so on. So, one of the big things you bring bring to the table, and we talked about this earlier, is, the expertise, your expertise and your ability to make recommendations and, the consulting side of things, right? Because a project is only as good as the design, right? So I know you get involved in a lot of the design, and we don't want to be brought in late in the process, right? And at the end of the day go, I wish we would have had an opportunity to have some input into the design. And I know, we just went through that with this one big project that we had. So I'll let you elaborate on that if you can.
And in some cases, it really is experience that comes into play. And to your other point, that's also what comes into play with study design. There are certain things where I guess the business term is like, why is this project a camel? Well, a camel is a horse built by or designed by a committee, right? That's why they call it a camel. If you try to do too much, or there's respondent fatigue, or the measures aren't correct for what we're looking for, something even as simple as if you're doing a usability task and you're going to try to aggregate it, making sure that some of the exposures are standardized in terms of exposure length, and also that the respondent isn't exposed to the stimuli before you even start the timer. Just basic good practices that can kind of ensure that you're going to get quality data that you can use and really rely on too. Because the biggest thing, that's said a lot, but one of the biggest pitfalls is if you collect bad data and don't even know. And that's one of the problems that's kind of plagued the eye tracking, biometrics, physiological research base in general, is if you go out and collect a lot of data, if you don't really know what you're looking at, there's going to be just natural movement in those, natural electrical activity in those EEG waves. Is that responding to your stimulus, or is that just because you did a bad job with the gel? There's a lot of different things that you can do. But again, having worked in this industry for so long, with a lot of the different, I've been on webinars with different equipment manufacturers and traveled to their facilities and things like that. Again, I don't proclaim to be, any type of super duper expert, but I do claim to have a lot of experience designing all kinds of different things with different types of equipment and methods and what have you, be it product testing, flavor and fragrance, UX, marketing materials. I know I did some work with cannabinoids and CBD in Europe with the research house with, again, IRBs and timed meals and things like that. There's a lot of different ways I've been a part of designing some of these studies, and that's something that I'm happy to be able to bring to IVP so that we can offer that next level of service.
So thank you. Switching gears a little bit, one of the biggest discussions I see in the market research industry right now is, and you mentioned it already, synthetic research versus in-person or human research, right? And again, I have nothing against synthetic research. I think there's a place for it. It's very useful if you want to get, data only without the why side of things. But obviously, and the why need to be combined in order for, the research to be as valid as possible, right? And one of the biggest thing that's, aside from the battle between sort of synthetic and real research, is, the quality of the data that's being collected, right? That's the other thing. It's like there's a lot of data going around, and I think this is what happened, when some of the technologies were introduced originally years ago, like eye tracking and biometrics and whatnot. It was a little bit of, I used to call it the wild, wild west. It was like, oh my gosh, all this stuff is happening, and all these researchers and end clients and everybody involved in the business were just trying to grab a hold of all this different technology. Got off on the wrong foot, basically. So, I'm hoping with AI that we're not going down that same path again, because that was and I mean, I see it happening, but I'm hoping that there's a little bit of pushback, right? And that everyone doesn't AI and AI without really understanding, again, both sides of the equation, which means, the research side can't be left behind, and you can't just take the data side and run with it. So, I'm hoping that I see some pushback in the whole, synthetic research, and without combining it with, human research to figure out and fill in the gaps with the why part of the equation.
Yeah, I see it, obviously it's I would not even classify it as a new technology more than, hey, we finally have the processing power to be able to do some of these things. But I see the AI situation in research being similar to probably what happened with biometrics and physiology, but also with virtual reality. In the early 2010s, I guess, is when a lot of the biometric stuff hit, and you could buy all kinds of GSR devices, and every other day there was a new company online with, the side profile shot of somebody's head with things popping out of it, and, calling themselves, brain, whatever.
By the way, Bill, let me stop you for a second. For purposes of our audience, let me just GSR, what that means for people who may not understand what that means. It's galvanic skin response, right? Which means to the layman out there, and I consider myself one of those, we are collecting levels of arousal, right? So we might integrate GSR with eye tracking or with another technology as well. So just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on what we meant when we say GSR. So I'll turn it back over to you, Bill.
Yeah, sorry about that, Bob. Yeah, so at that point, there were a lot of companies popping up, and they would talk about System One and things like that. And some of them are still around. Some of them were just a flash in the pan. And with virtual reality, I guess that was probably the mid-teens, 2015, 2016. Everybody wanted to do, put a headset on everything, be it, hotel room design to one I had was, can you do with a American domestic beer brand? And I remember pricing it out and telling them, hey, listen, if you want to have this virtual reality environment interactive and things like, it's going to cost you $250,000 just for the environment. And I remember, just dead air for 5 seconds while they digested that, because again, see it a lot in promotional materials and in different industry magazines as being the next big thing. And in a lot of ways, there are places for all of these things. Once some of the initial, novelty of it wears off, then some of the good things rise up, some of the bad things kind of fall to the bottom. Regarding synthetic data, obviously there's a place for it. One of the things that I had always wanted to do and never had a chance. So anyone out there who wants to work with us on this is take a data set from like synthetic eye tracking results and run it against a study with real people and real eye trackers to try to see how it shakes up, just to see, to kind of explore how that really works and kind of delve more into that. But that's a bit of a different.
Yeah, like I said, I think the data would be similar. I just don't think that the reasoning would be similar, right? It's hard to try to figure out what somebody was thinking or what you thought they were thinking, right? Other than, then the flip side is to actually ask them what they were thinking, right? So I don't know. We'll see how it all plays out.
And when you're pulling data from a database to try to, at the end of the day, even when you go enter something on an AI search engine or something on the web, it's pulling data from a database it's already collected and worked with, right? Whatever is currently live. Well, sometimes things change. You and I spoke about how, basically the 5-year anniversary of the COVID pandemic. Well, if you were doing restaurant research the first week of March of 2020, you were probably feeling pretty good. A month later, whatever research you had is probably dead because everything is completely different. And with historical data, anytime you pull from historical data, you do run that risk. And, AI is very much better than it used to be with working with, fresher information, but you do sometimes run that risk where data could be old or there could be issues, even back when AI first hit, you'd ask it to draw a picture of a person and the person would have 6 fingers. A lot of the real growing pains are being worked out. But if you're someone who's making, multi-million-dollar business decisions, there's certainly a place for that, but you also need to make sure you kind of hedge your bet more traditionally and use the two things in tandem, just like how we would always say, for the most part, you never really want to do physiological like EEG or GSR or EMG, basic biometric research on ads or print ads without also asking the person a few questions, because while the equipment works great and you get great results and it can tell you a lot, sometimes there's no substitution for just asking somebody, what did you think? Unless they're just going to lie to you, there is always going to be a place for that. And taking a multifaceted approach to research, again, from my years of experience with this, has always been the best. It's always provided color, and sometimes it may be a bit confusing to work with, but at the end of the day, you've controlled for a lot of things, and you're working towards a good goal, and you have a stable foundation to base your.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bill. I think we're kind of running out of time here, but everything we've just talked about, especially the things that you've just said, just solidifies the decision I made to bring you on board to IVP, and it makes me feel good that I made that decision. So that being said, I'd like to thank you, Bill, for being on our podcast. I'm happy to have you here at IVP. I'm sure we're going to do a lot of great things over the next. Thanks again for being on board. I encourage everyone, if you're doing any type of research that involves behavioral or emotional measures, please give us a call. We'd love to have that conversation early on. So again, that being said, great to have another installment of Both Sides of the Mirror. Hopefully this was useful. And until the next one, we're signing out here, and we'll see you on the flip side at some point down the line.